What is a family secret or private moment you witnessed that completely changed the way you look at a relative? I never knew my grandparents loved each other until I started visiting them during the summer as a teenager. They were very old school, very reserved in front of others. One morning I came down the stairs and saw them in the kitchen before they could see me. My grandma was sitting at the table with her coffee, reading the paper, and my grandpa brought her breakfast before gently petting her head, and when she looked up at him, it was like a physical manifestation of pure love passed between them. She smiled at him and reached up and patted his hand, and he leaned down and kissed her forehead in a way that still brings tears to my eyes when I think about it. It was the first time I saw them be physically affectionate outside of a handhold or pat on the shoulder, and completely changed how I saw their relationship. After that moment, I paid better attention, and saw the ways they loved each other without words and when no one was looking, and saw so many quiet examples of a deep love. They were married 65 years. This, I can only imagine, is going to be the sweetest one in this whole thread. Starting with it is, I don't know, just a good vibe for the rest of this. Some people really just don't show that kind of stuff in public, and that's fine. They know that they love each other, and really that's enough. They don't gotta prove it to anyone. Next story. My great-grandmother was often visited by a man with special needs when I was a kid. He was a little younger than my grandparents. My relatives all called him a family friend, and I didn't think too much about it. Sometime after her death, I found a letter that was addressed to a woman in Arizona. That woman in Arizona was my great-grandfather's mistress, with whom he had a child, our family friend. My great-grandmother had forgiven him, and they would send money for their child's raising and care. Sometime later, after his mother passed, he came to live near my great-grandmother, said a lot to me about her character, that she would treat him as her own all those years later. Not sure I would have done the same. Next story. I was at my cousin's house when we were about 8. Aunt and uncle were upstairs wrapping Christmas gifts. Obviously, we weren't supposed to be up there, but we happened to be trying to sneak a peek at gifts. Saw my uncle lunge at my aunt, stabbing her with the scissors. She told everyone the next day she had fallen, and I was confused why she would lie. I now realize she was a domestic violence victim, but was always confused from then on out being around them as a kid. Next story. Was finally let in on the secret that my grandfather assaulted my grandmother when they first met, producing my father. Then, 23 years later, assaulted my other grandma, mom's side, at my parents' wedding. Oh, and then he assaulted a woman janitor that worked for him. Also always wondered why my uncle went back to Scotland. Turns out he was deported for assaulting a real estate agent at knife point. Wow, OP has a family full of winners, don't they? Oh my gosh. What a disgustingly good example of a repeat offender. Some people are just wicked to the core, I guess. Next story. After my grandfather passed, I learned that he had at one point been hospitalized for depression. The man was a mountain, outdoorsman, engineer, professor, veteran, and despite seeming grumpy and gruff due to his chronic pain, was very compassionate and playful with us grandchildren. That he could have suffered from depression to that degree has helped me with some of my own depression and feelings of self-worth. Makes me miss him even more. Next story. My mom found child content on my stepfather's computer after I told her he had been touching me inappropriately, and he convinced her he just saved it because, quote, it was so awful he couldn't believe what he saw. When she told me that after they separated years later for him cheating with a much younger woman, I haven't respected her decision-making since. Next story. The trauma my mother endured as a child. She never told me about it. My grandmother did in my late teens. She found her father's body after he took his own life and was mercilessly beaten by her cognitively impaired brother throughout her childhood and adolescence. Next story. Found out my sweet Christian grandma had an affair with my dad, her son-in-law, which led to my parents' divorce. My mom kept it a secret for over a decade because she didn't want me to look at my grandma any differently. Wasn't surprised by my dad's actions, but will never be able to look at my grandma the same way. She was also married to my grandpa, literally the sweetest man in the world, when this happened. He's passed now, though, and never found out. Next story. After my grandfather died, a baby photo was found in his Bible that didn't belong to any relatives. He was in the same platoon that the Band of Brothers was based off of. We are fairly certain he fathered another baby overseas during World War II and took it to his grave. Next story. My sister was interviewing our grandfather for a school project once and asked what his earliest memory was. It was of the FBI showing up at his door and arresting our great-grandfather. Great-grandpa was still able to provide for his family during the Great Depression, ostensibly because of his successful auto scrapyard. It turns out the much more lucrative side was helping the mob launder cash. Not that they ever proved anything. Next story. My grandmother's dentures broke while she was having lunch. I was in the living room with her while it happened. Her daughters, my mom and aunt, absolutely lost their minds on her, blaming her for chewing too hard. The look she gave me was just so miserable. She just wanted to be believed and looked at me so helplessly. I blew up on my parents and chewed them out for sounding absolutely insane. Seriously, what the hell is chewing too hard? Ever since then, I tell them to shut up and screw off all the time because I see them for the verbally abusive victim blamers they are. Everything that happens to them is their fault because of something they did. What's funny is they think I'm a massive jerk for speaking to them the way they speak to everyone else. Next story. I remember being a very small child, 3-ish, visiting my great-grandparents and my mom being very upset, shouting no while pulling me away from a great uncle who was trying to put me in his lap. She never wanted him to be near me. I thought it was because he was usually drunk. Years later, she told me that when she was 7, this uncle tried to make her put her hand in his pocket because he had a worm in there and she could play with it. She was also worried about this uncle's behavior with her little sister. She told her mother and got screamed at. "Stop being so nasty. It isn't true what they say about Murray. There's nothing wrong with him." She was upset that her mother wouldn't protect her and her sister, and that she was called nasty for trying to tell her. My grandmother often acted in very peculiar ways. My grandfather once sadly said that something very bad happened when she was growing up. He didn't know what it was, but something happened that made her mind not right. She was suspicious and accusatory of innocent people, but turned her head to her brother's perversion. Next story. When I was 16, I overheard my dad on the phone at like 2 a.m. He thought everyone else was asleep. He was talking to the electric company, asking for payment extension. I'd always thought he was just strict and kind of emotionally unavailable. Turns out he was juggling bills and just never let us feel it. Completely changed how I saw him. He wasn't cold, he was tired. Next story. After I got dumped by my partner of 6 years, I moved back home. I always had a close relationship with my grandparents, and I've had a key to their house since I can remember. One day it was just my granny and I, and she started telling me about the man she almost married before grandpa. This was news to me because they were pretty perfect together, 60 plus years of marriage and still laughing and joking with each other all the time. But apparently there was another man in town who had been kind of courting my granny back in the day, and she thought he was going to be the one she married. Then she went to a village dance, saw my grandpa, and that was it. She told me that the man she almost married had stayed in town and married someone else, and that he beat his wife terribly. She had a kind of mix of guilt and relief that her life had gone a different way, but the guilt because someone else still went through that. It was really sad and had clearly stuck with her all this time. She passed last year, and I always wondered if she'd ever told that story to anyone else. Then at her funeral, my aunt, her daughter, was talking about how much Granny had worried if my sister's boyfriend was a kind man, and how that was all she asked about. Maybe I'm making assumptions, but I think she was thinking about her almost husband, and worrying that my sister was gonna end up in a marriage like that. Fortunately, my now brother-in-law is a great guy. Opie, your grandmother sounds like the sweetest person ever. And I don't think it's that much of a stretch that she was thinking about her almost husband. That kind of near miss would definitely make you more cautious, both in your life and for the people around you. And hey, what kind of parent wouldn't want to see their daughter marry someone actually worthy of their love? Next story. My uncle, who is in long-term care and nearing the end of his life, was believed to have been drafted into the army in 1970. At least, that's what we all thought. I asked my aunt for his DD-214 and discovered that he actually enlisted in May 1970. His birthday is September 13th, 1951, and his draft number would have been 135. In the July 1st, 2070 draft lottery, they called numbers 1 to 125. So not only was he not drafted, he enlisted 2 months before the lottery even took place. Why does everyone think he was drafted when he actually signed up voluntarily? Next story. When I was in my maybe late teens, I asked my uncle at a family gathering about his new job. He had been laid off from a management position and was out of work for a bit, and I knew he'd just started work at a candy manufacturing plant. I want to say it was a typical crap job working a production line, the kind of job you take to keep your family afloat when you're desperate. I naively said something to the effect of, "How's the new job? Do you like it?" To which he replied, "No, it's terrible. I don't think I had ever up to that point had an adult nakedly admit to me that sometimes the world kicks you in the butt and you take a crappy job when it's better than nothing. Next story. The childhood friend of my father, their families had been close for at least 50 years, was the type of guy to make inappropriate jokes around 13 to 14-year-old boys, and my father would laugh it off as a joke. My father would go to his place and take me with him when I was around 15. When my uncle heard that, he very sternly warned me to stay away from him. Over time, I grew uneasy around him, and when I was 18, he managed to get me to stay for one night in his place for, quote, my safety. He even called and convinced my mother. He tried to assault me. If he wasn't drunk and I couldn't fight him off, I have no clue what that night would have been like. Later, tried to talk to my father about his friend, and he waved me off, saying it was all rumors. Guy didn't even listen to me to understand I was talking about first-hand experience. I stopped talking to my father from that day until he died. Next story. I can never look at several of my family members the same. One aunt didn't take her aging dog to the vet, and he was losing his sight and in pain. Another uncle kicked the dog because he snapped at him, didn't bite, just snapped, because of how much pain he was in, and another uncle also refused to take their dog to the vet, and wouldn't allow me to do it when I offered. Have had to call the RSPCA on that one, and will never look at any of them the same. Being told all my life that we let things slide because family is most important, but then they do things like this that I can't let go, I finally realized that family isn't the most important. Next story. During my childhood, there was always an extra man or two at the table for holiday dinners when my grandparents hosted. It was rare for the same person to attend more than one dinner. When I was in my late teens, I realized these guests were all recovering alcoholics. My grandpa was involved in AA and also managed a halfway house later in life. My grandparents regularly invited people in recovery with nowhere else to go to celebrate the holidays with us. As an adult, I realize how much love and support my grandparents showed those men trying to stay sober. I cannot believe this thread is so positive so far. So many amazing, beautiful, hidden little things that are only hidden because they didn't want to take, egregious credit for them. They did them out of the kindness of their hearts, and that is amazing. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some bad ones in here too, but so far, a lot more positive than I was expecting. Next story. My uncle likely ended my grandfather, shredded and forged his will, and there's a strong possibility that he and his wife faked their own deaths and are in Brazil. Oh, okay. Well, my bad for the last comment. This is where we're at now. They also staged multiple charity events that only benefited them and their friends. I was the only child left out of my grandfather's will, and will never know what his last wishes were for me. He was the only person who really believed in me for a lot of my life, and I was his only grandkid that never asked for anything. I rarely tell anyone this because of how insane it sounds, and it hasn't exactly been easy to cope with. Next story. My parents divorced when I was 3. Dad moved back to his home state soon after. He eventually remarried. I think I was about 7 when I met her. She was hot. Big curly red hair, always done up, tight pants, nails, big hoop earrings. They had motorcycles, a nice place, and had me and my brothers out for the summer. Had a birthday party for me, tons of G.I. Joes. I thought, hey, well, this two-family thing ain't that bad. That was the only time I met her, though because it turned out she wasn't an overnight trucker like she said, she was actually an escort that serviced a lot of truckers and other clients. She got arrested, they ended up divorced, and I lost interest in my dad because he was kind of a jerk. Next story. I always knew my grandfather was a sober alcoholic. He'd been sober since my mom was in high school, so I never knew the drunk version of him. After he died, my grandmother asked my brother to go through his toolbox and take anything we wanted. Under the lining of the bottom drawer, my brother found a blank envelope with 2 pieces of paper. On each paper, front and back, was a list of names. He asked me to look at it, and I recognized a few names, people my grandfather would say were, quote, in the club. I realized it was a list of everyone he had sponsored in AA. I didn't read any further. We put it back in the envelope and gave it to my grandmother. We told her what we thought it was. Without looking, she tore it up and put it in the fireplace. That list was for nobody's eyes but our grandfather's, and the people on that list deserved their anonymity even after his death. We never mentioned it again. A few days later, the funeral director voluntarily told me he was sponsored by my grandfather. I hadn't seen his name, I only read a few, and in that moment, I knew my grandmother was right for destroying the list. That relationship between an alcoholic and their sponsor is sacred, and she was going to protect it when my grandfather couldn't do so himself. Next story. The one and only time I ever saw my dad get emotional. He was never one to show or express his emotions. He was always tough and soft-spoken, said little, but whenever he did speak, his words carried weight. I remember one night in high school where I couldn't sleep and decided to try to raid the refrigerator for some late-night snacks. Instead, I stopped on the stairs, overhearing my mom talk with my dad. They were discussing how it was impossible to pay bills due to my 2 older siblings being in college and me about to be 2 years away from going off to college. My dad was a high-earning engineer for oil and gas. However, his large salary still wasn't enough to support 3 kids, a wife, and 3 cats. Also, a lot of medical issues arose for him due to his poor diet, stress, and heart issues. It was the first time I ever saw my dad look at a stack of bills and cover his face in shame and defeat. He muttered, "How the hell am I supposed to pay the mortgage when I can't afford groceries for y'all?" Next story. My husband's father, we will call him W, was married to my husband's mother. We will call her K. W received a cancer diagnosis when K was pregnant with my husband, and W died when my husband was a toddler. From what we heard from others, W loved my husband dearly, and he was his entire world all the way to the end. Then W's very loving Italian family stepped up and helped the new widow and infant son whenever they could. They lived out of state, but they brought my husband on trips, sent money, visited, stayed in contact, always excited to see us, all really nice people. This was the world my husband lived in for 30-something years, until the death of one of these family members brought the horrible revelation that he was in fact no way related to this poor family. We left the funeral early after tons of awkward, "It must be some sort of mistake." They all tried to wave it away. They all hugged us goodbye with tears in their eyes. They all knew. We could all feel it, and everyone hurt so bad in that moment. My husband called his mother on the long drive home and demanded answers. Kay denied everything and said that the tests were wrong. Somebody must have mixed up the sample. Interesting point, my husband found out he's a quarter Native American from the Canadian Salt tribe of Chippewa, which instantly caught his attention because, wouldn't you know it, a male family friend who he had known his entire life was almost half Native American. Little did we know my husband's mother was screwing a local, we'll call him N, who was also married with a crapload of kids with a wife and, you guessed it, was the half Native American fellow. Kay has lied, made excuses, changed reality in which she is always the victim. Her story has changed so many times and only changes when you confront her with direct evidence and she can't lie her way out of it. What we pulled out of other living family/friends that did know and never told my husband, including his own half-sister. Kay wanted N to leave his wife for her, and she was going to leave W, so tried to baby trap N. Kay was just a booty call to him, so it failed. He told her to get an abortion. She thought it was a bluff, that when the child was born he would come to his senses. Kay got too far along to hide the pregnancy or have an abortion, and then she finds out her husband W was dying. What better way to get more of W's pension money for a dependent than convince your dying husband you conceived his miracle baby, all while you wait to use said baby to get your lover to leave his family for you. She must have really thought for a time that she made it with this plan. She gets to play grieving widow for a man she was going to leave. No messy divorce. She gets to have this baby and then marry his stepdad when enough time has passed, and she gets a big, fat pension check for the new little dependent. She has the smartest person in the room energy. Plan failed. W lived longer than they thought he would by a couple of years, and refused to acknowledge child, and she was stuck knowing that if she revealed him, everyone would see her fraud. Sort of a mutually assured destruction situation, but they still remained friends until he died, including having this man be a random and confusing part of my husband's childhood. She then got stuck as a widow single mother with another mouth to feed and no additional child support from his biological father. Now she denied it right up until my husband made his test results publicly matchable, and it matched to a couple of members of N's family, half siblings and a cousin. Then started the tears and the bullcrap. "You were never supposed to know. I did all of it to protect you." It blew our minds how much my husband looked like N's family, and how our children looked like people in N's family. His half-brother looks like our son, and his niece like our daughter's twin. He never felt like he was part of W's family, but thought maybe it was just the distance he had from all of them. He always felt out of place and different. He loved them, but felt an unexplained guilt when around them. Now he knows why. He was a mockingbird child. This sort of thing is what really makes me believe that family related by blood doesn't mean anything. I don't know if that's a hot take or not. I mean, it probably is because I'm half Chinese. Family's a big deal in that sort of culture, but I really just don't think blood relation is anything. It is the most made up, fake, artificial, how many ways can I say made up, connection between people that I can imagine. Sharing DNA does not make your husband their family. If they become a bigger part of his family in the future, sure, but it has to be a choice. It has to be worked on and developed. You do not just spawn in a familial relationship. The family is the people who raised him, who took him on trips, who helped pay for all of his stuff, helped feed him, the people who loved him. That's his family, blood or not. Next story. My maternal grandfather was a damned assaulter and a predator. Both sets of my grandparents, ones who were alive, were pretty aloof and disconnected. My maternal grandmother was nice to me when I visited as a kid. My maternal grandfather has always been an egoist jerk, but still, it broke me to hear my mother talk about how he would beat his wife and children, and then insist his 12-year-old daughters just entering puberty sleep topless so he could feel them up every night. Many years later, he started undressing in my room when my sister and I were asleep. My father found him and ushered him out. My mother described marriage to my father as legal assault. He is also, surprise, surprise, an abusive jerk. He's not a predator, and my mother told me that singular quality made him an excellent father. My mother is also abusive, having had to live through and endure these nightmares. So much abuse. Every damn place I look in my family. True to Indian family culture, my grandfather and my father retained strong familial connections until his death in his 90s. Can't go around upsetting the menfolk. Next story. I was told my uncle was a philanderer, and that really colored me against him. One time we were taking a long walk on the beach having cocktails and talking. He had met my aunt and she'd gotten pregnant. Her family was very well connected and they did, quote, the right thing and got married. He said, "A month later, I met the love of my life." Turns out that my aunt was fully aware. Nothing was hidden and secretive. It was an arrangement among consenting adults. It completely changed my relationship with him, as I'd been in a complicated situation myself. Next story. I had that cool, crazy uncle. Always had a big smile, joked with everyone, rode a Harley, and wanted to join a motorcycle club. Until he had something to drink. I remember family gatherings as a kid, all eating dinner together. By the time dinner ended and he had a few drinks, us kids were told to go downstairs and watch a movie. Looking back now, it was because of how he acted. In college, I did a research paper on PTSD and how it affects soldiers. By now, I had learned he was a Vietnam vet, so I created a 20-something question form and sent it to my aunt with a note that I wanted her to cross out any questions that would affect him in a bad way. He returned it a week later and answered all of my questions. I learned about some things that triggers his PTSD, how it's affected his daily life over the last 30 years, and some stories about things that happened to him during and after the war. In the years since, he was able to go to schools and talk to students about his experiences. He also got a chance to meet with members of his unit and a guy they rescued to talk about things that happened. It really helped me to understand why he did certain things the way he did and how he acted. I've been able to research the documentation on medals he earned and things like that too. Next story. During college, I stayed at my uncle's home for a few weeks. My uncle's wife was not well liked. Not hated, just not well liked, if that makes sense. I didn't know why. I was young and didn't care about the drama anyway. The uncle's mother-in-law also lived with them at the time. She was sweet and kind. One day the grandma was putting the dishes away or something, but it wasn't the way the aunt liked it. The attitude and the berating the aunt gave her mother was an absolute shock to me. The aunt's eyes as she looked at her mother, full of hate and resentment. I could never look at my mother like that, ever. I completely lost any respect I ever had for the aunt after that moment. Next story. I only knew my maternal grandpa when he was old and decrepit, and he spent his final years staring blankly at the television while drooling and eating Hostess pastries. I didn't know a lot about him, and even as a child, something about him scared me. Turns out he was an unfiltered jerk. Every kind of ist in the book. Racist, misogynist, homophobic, ableist, the whole 9 yards. He physically abused my mom and her sisters, and although I don't think we'll ever get confirmation, I strongly suspect there may have been assault somewhere in the mix. My grandpa had 6 girls in total, all within a relatively short time frame. I wouldn't be surprised if my grandpa was trying to make her have a boy. My grandma stayed with him despite all this. Apparently, she told my mom that if she had to choose between her children and her husband, she would choose her husband. She turned a blind eye towards a lot of his abuse, whether intentionally or not, and to this day, my mom still resents this, even though she passed away. Fun fact, my mom and all her sisters ended up getting divorced. I think it's because they didn't know what a stable marriage was supposed to look like. I'm sorry, OP, your mom and all her sisters? We're talking 6 people in the same family all getting divorced? Yeah, this one's not random chance. This is 100% an environment thing. Next story. My uncle was a hoarder, like to the point where we found out his main house was so packed it was broken into and it couldn't be determined if anything was actually stolen or not. You couldn't even open the doors. He didn't live in that house though, because he inherited my grandma's house. When he died and we had to clean out that house among other things, we found that he never cleaned out the hamper. We found my grandma's dirty clothes still in there almost a decade from her passing. To this day, I'm not meticulous in cleanliness, but when I see any kind of pile of junk from my sister or kids, I freak out a little. To be honest, to a lesser extent, because I still doubt he ever acted on it, we also found out he was gay. No big deal, but a bit of a shock. But liked a lot younger, to the point where the cops had to go through his computer to see if he had any online inappropriate interactions. I had to go through his hidden tapes to determine if anything needed to be handed over, etc. Lots of Thai young men, not sure if any were underage, but close. I highly doubt he ever acted on his urges, but the various videos kinda creeped me out when I think of the fancy gifts he gave my son as a child. And he was big in Boy Scouts, so now there's always that question mark above him. Next story. When I was a teenager, my mom told me why she never let me sleep over at her parents' house when I was always allowed to sleep over at my dad's parents' house. Turns out my grandparents were raging alcoholics, and my grandfather beat all his kids and his wife. He also assaulted my mom when she was younger. I've never been able to look at them the same, and I don't know how my mom manages to be in the same room with them. Next story. Turns out I have 2 half-sisters I didn't know about growing up, each from different women my father banged. One even visited for a few weeks once as the daughter of a friend, and my dad looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Don't screw her," which was highly unusual given he stayed out of my intimate life. I wasn't planning on screwing her anyhow, but that was weird. It kind of clicked after that when I saw how much she looked like him. Took him another 20 years to finally admit it though. Apparently neither of these girls knew he was their real father, at least according to him. They each thought their fathers was the man their mothers married. This was all before the 23andMe, which I've never done, but I often wonder how much crap would get blown up if I did and if one of them did as well. Next story. This very recently happened. I came out of the psych ward due to my newly diagnosed PMDD sending me into a very scary psychosis. While I was being treated, I had made a plan to go stay with my brother and his wife. For the first couple of days after release, really no one talked to me. It was like I was ghosted. I finally got my mom to answer my 5th phone call. She spoke to me with such disgust, making sure to tell me all this happened because I wasn't serving the Lord and praying well enough. I firmly corrected her thinking and then told her a quick goodbye because I was still so vulnerable. She then ran over to my brother and told him I was mean to her and that I had become a drug addict because I had pot in my system. So by the time I talked with my brother, he was also very disgusted with me. Guess who I won't ever talk to again? And they have no idea why. Next story. I was in the room when my mom gave birth to my youngest sibling. I was a teen at the time. I watched her labor and suffer for hours and hours, shriek and writhe in pain, pray to a God she doesn't believe in, and more than once admit, "I don't think I can do it this time." Then I watched her damn near break her body to push a new life into the world. And then it hit me all at once that she did all of this and more. I was a longer, more complicated delivery. Give me a shot at life. My views of her changed immensely that day. Thanks, Mom. Next story. In 1993, my favorite uncle lost his life, and my other uncle wasn't allowed to visit us. My mom would hide us from my dad to go visit my uncle. I was in my early 20s when I found out what really happened. Long story short, my uncle that we weren't allowed to see was a low-level Tijuana cartel, and his brother, favorite uncle, was sent to pay off a debt unaware about what my other uncle actually does, and he lost his life. That same uncle tried to get my mom to do a favor for him, and my dad put a stop to it. Essentially, my dad saved our lives. Next story. Got a letter thanking me for a wheelchair donation to a hospital in Colombia. I share a name with my father, and they thought it was for me. Turns out he makes a yearly donation to the hospital where a cousin of mine was taken and helped after getting hit by a drunk driver. I don't know why he kept it a secret at first. Maybe because we were always tight on money and my mother would have thought it a frivolous expense. But he told me they said his nephew wouldn't walk again. But they operated on him, and after a few years he was able to walk. And once they didn't need the wheelchair, my uncle donated it to the hospital and my father gave one too. It's something they both do as gratitude for God and that hospital. Next story. One summer I was one of the college-age grandchildren on rotating assignments to help our 70-plus-year-old grandparents out. They had been arguing all week. Little stuff, but a lot of harumphs and yelling. My grandma said, "I'm leaving you," went upstairs, packed a little bag, put on her best going-to-town suit and hat, called a cab, took the train into the city, NYC, and stayed with a friend all week. Went to the spa, went shopping, went to museums and art exhibits, had a lovely time. Grandpa was miserable, moped around, grumbled. I cooked for him and helped him around the yard. He didn't even want to go fishing, just sat around listening to the radio and grumbling at the newspaper. And Grandma reappeared, polished, elegant, relaxed, and Grandpa was desperately affectionate. "I missed you so much." And while she was hugging him and he was crying, she looked at me and gave me a slow, sly wink. Next story. I had an uncle who, to me, was the kindest, funniest, most engaging and heartwarming person I had ever known as a child, and him coming to visit was always the highlight of the entire season. He was basically infallible to me, so ultra positive all the time. When I was around 21, my mom asked me for some help on her computer, and in helping her, I incidentally came across an email from my uncle to my mom, where my uncle was chastising and berating my mom, calling her names, talking about all the grave sins she had committed, how irresponsible she was, the deep disrespect she had shown him, how he couldn't believe she would still act like such a child at her age, and that she has always been disrespectful to him and the whole family, even from the time when they were children. I immediately wondered what my mom could have possibly done that she warranted such a drastic email from my jolly uncle. What was this grave sin? It turned out she owed him $250 and had informed him in advance that she would need an extra week to make good on it. And the email I read was my uncle's first response. It was like a switch just flipped for me in regards to my uncle. Gone was my jolly uncle, and I was left with just a memory of what turned out to be performances. I never got the chance to talk to him about it before he passed, and now that I'm older, I feel more conflicted about it. Next story. I mean, the woman is dead, so it's redundant now, I guess, but we didn't find out till years after she died. My great-grandmother, who I didn't know till I was about 6, got pregnant with her first at 19 and gave birth at 20. Great-Nan's husband, who she married so they wouldn't be born out of wedlock, was 18 when the baby was born, until they found out recently that his documents had been forged to say he was 18. It was all so he could get married. He wasn't 18. He was 14. It was such an embarrassment to the community and his family that they lied about his age. My family said it makes sense, as the in-laws absolutely hated Great-Nan and no one knew why. I was 6 when she died, and I always found her a lovely lady, but I was told by my parents that she was quite a shady character and wasn't a very nice woman. We didn't realize that she was that shady. They had 5 kids in total, and my mom said her granddad was a hardworking and devoted family man. Everyone else will say the same. They said he was salt of the earth, and now I feel a bit bad that he was thrown into being a dad at 14. I didn't meet him, but it must have been quite hard being 14 and suddenly married and a dad. Next story. I found out in my teens after my great-grandmother passed away that she was the only survivor after her father murdered her mother and all of her siblings. She was maybe 5 or 6 and only survived because she hid under a porch when it all started. Apparently her dad called her name for hours, but she never came out. Eventually he gave up and took his own life. She was sweet, quiet, but you never would have guessed trauma like that. Next story. My dad is one of 14, and I did hospice care for my dying uncle, and I heard my aunts at the kitchen table talking about how my grandfather would assault my grandmother, and each time when they would find out she was pregnant again, the older kids would cry because they were the ones responsible for the babies. I remember growing up before leaving my grandparents' house, my mom would force me to hug my grandfather, and he would put his hand up to stop me, go in his pocket, give me $2, and tell me to go to the candy store. My mom mom did that because she knew he hated kids and it was her way of screwing with him. Next story. 12 years after my dad died, I found out I had a secret half-sister from an affair my dad had 18 years before I was born. He surrendered his parental rights to her mother because he didn't want my mom to find out he had an affair. Ironically, if he had told my mom, I likely wouldn't have existed because it would have ended their marriage. I already thought my father wasn't a very good person, but knowing that just cemented what an absolute jerk he was. On a side note, my sister, super cool. Next story. My mom had mental health issues, and my parents divorced when I was 8. My dad always blamed the divorce on that. I had to live with her for another 10 years after that, so I sympathized with him. My dad served in the military, and my mom wrote him letters the entire time he was away. He saved them all. At one point, when I was an adult, he gave them to me, but asked me not to read them until after they had both passed. When I finally got around to reading them, I realized my mother's mental health issues were very, very visible well before they married. Lost any sympathy I had for him. You knew what you were getting into, Dad. I can't be too mad, though, because I wouldn't be here if he hadn't ignored his brain and listened to his dong. Next story. I was always fascinated by my grandfather. He was very successful and very mysterious when it came to his success. I knew he was CEO of a large multinational company, one that had over 100,000 employees. He was always going out dressed up lovely, and when I was about 15, I decided to follow him. This was 10 years ago now. He went onto the train and headed into the city, caught another train and went to a completely different area. I followed him from a distance when he was walking down some streets, and then I saw him turn into a house. I didn't really think much of it, so I just kept walking, and I walked past the house, looked in the window, and I saw him sitting on the couch with another woman and several kids. I was very, very confused. I always remembered that, never forgot. I wanted to ask him, but I didn't want to expose myself for following him. So my friend and I went back to that house that I saw him in several months later, and I knocked on the door, pretending to be someone who was interested in washing windows. And completely to my surprise, the woman who answered recognized me. She said I'm Jason's son, Jason is my dad, and she laughed and asked what I'm doing there. She invited me inside and was being very lovely. As I was sitting in the lounge room, I was looking at all of the pictures on the mantle and on the walls. It was of my grandfather with her and a whole lot of kids I don't recognize. It started to hit me that my grandfather had an entirely different family, an entirely different life, only 30 minutes away. She came back into the living room and looked at me very confused, and I said, "Who am I?" She said, "Oh, Jason's son." And I said, "Well, who's Jason?" And she told me, "Well, that's my grandfather's colleague." So basically my grandfather was telling his secret family that his son, that is my dad, is his work colleague. My grandfather and I kept a good relationship, and I never spoke of it, but he knew that I knew. Next story. My grandfather died when my father was a child, so I never met him. I grew up hearing only positive things about him. When I started with a genealogy, I interviewed my grandma, and she told me a few stories that changed how I viewed him. One of those stories was that he punched his sister in the face because she sold their mother's sewing machine. That was a few weeks before he died. She died the same year. There was also another story that rubbed me the wrong way. He said to my grandma he would like to take her virginity before marriage as a way to get back at my great-grandmother for being too strict. But he, quote, respected grandma too much, so he didn't. And my step-grandfather. He and my grandma raised me the first years, and he was great to me. I got way more attention than the biological grandchildren. I learned how horrible he was to my father, and the fact that he left his wife after 20-ish years for a woman 17 years younger. It didn't really help his case. Next story. I read my mother's diary when she and my dad were going through a messy divorce. There were pages describing the verbal abuse disguised as joking, the callous threats to upend my siblings and my lives, possible infidelity, and overall jerkery. It completely changed how I saw both of them. I notice when my dad's being a sexist jerk and have a distant relationship. I'm also hyper-aware of my mom's emotional shifts and have a bit of a protective streak with her. It drives me nuts whenever family members ask me why I'm like this, because I can't tell the truth. If my mom ever found out, she would never trust me again. Understandably. Next story. I'll give a good one and a bad one. Bad. One of my uncles was struggling financially for a good bit. His restaurant that he poured time, energy, and love into had just gone under, and he was contemplating next steps. My aunt, as wonderful as she was in many respects, was and still is quite materialistic, and started threatening divorce if my uncle couldn't find a career that would pay for the lifestyle she wanted. It got so bad that his brothers, my father, and other uncles called a kind of family gathering with all of the adults to mediate and figure out how to help. I guess it worked. Uncle and aunt are still together, and uncle seems to have a decent paying career that he doesn't mind, but no one talks about the incident and will deny it ever happened. And good. Long, long ago, my brothers and I were young teens, and my brother, having just learned about racism and prejudice, asked my grandfather whether he was ever racist or had prejudice. My grandfather, a chemical engineer who may or may not have worked in some government labs at some point in World War II, said, "When you're picking up heavy pressurized centrifuges full of chemicals that can disintegrate the human body, you don't care what the other guy looks like. You just pray he won't drop anything." That is maybe the funniest way to answer the question. And hey, fair enough. In times like those, you do not have time to be a jerk. Hopefully Grandpa was truthful about that. Next story. I grew up with my cousins and always saw them like my own brother and sister, so we were that close. Fast forward 25 years, I visited him in another country, and on New Year's, we got drunk watching fireworks while FaceTiming family. I made a cutthroat gesture joking like he's too drunk, don't take him too seriously, and he completely flipped out, screaming, pushing, slapping me. People had to pull us apart. He called the family back and forced me to apologize for lying, saying I did it to embarrass him, and if I didn't, he'd beat the crap out of me. Meanwhile, the family was so confused, saying I didn't do anything wrong. I flew home the next day because I've never felt that disrespected and never been bickered like that. Growing up, I looked up to him, but after that night, I saw him as an insecure, aggressive drunk. I didn't talk to him for a year, and when I reached out, he just said he was out of line. Didn't even apologize, though. He was 39 and I was 25. Next story. My aunt, twin of my late father, and her husband were always my favorite. I had a billion sleepovers and was always excited to go there. That didn't change when I got older, but someday my aunt had a stroke and since isn't able to form any sentences anymore, except a few words like yes, no, name of dog, name of son. My aunt's sister was talking to my mother one day about the fact that my favorite aunt fell down the stairs and was badly bruised, and that she thinks my uncle pushed her down the stairs. This is because my favorite aunt called her and was completely out of it, crying and trying to tell her something. We still don't know if he did it. Abusive physical behavior was never a thing in my family, so that was crazy wild for teenage me to imagine, even though now I know it's not uncommon. Since the day she fell or got pushed, nothing like that happened again. So I'm hoping he didn't do it, and it really was just an accident. Next story. I don't know if I imagined this or if my brain was immediately really good at pushing the memory deep and away, but I have a vivid image in my head of my 13-year-old cousin assaulting me when I was 7 or 8, and her mom, my aunt, coming into the room and hollering in anger at the top of her lungs as she told me to pull my pants up and leave the bedroom. I'm 35 now. To this day, I still don't know if it actually happened. I have a very vivid imagination, and I've been able to remember all my dreams since I was 5, so I go back and forth between doubting it ever happening and believing it did. Because I don't know if it really happened, I've never confronted anyone about it. I go to the family reunions and hang out with the family like nothing happened, but I always have my cousin in my periphery/side eye because I just don't know. We all get along and share love, and at this point, it's been so many years, the only result of bringing something like this up would be turmoil, confusion, and God knows what else. I've just lived with it. Whether it happened or not, I don't think I'll ever confirm in either way. But I definitely have always seen my cousin and aunt in a slightly darker light behind my smiles and hugs. Next story. I recently found my stepdad's collection of adult content and quite a few other things that I'm trying to process and figure out what to do with or how to handle the situation. In his shop, where my mom never goes, he has old magazines and burned DVDs of adult content. This man has no friends and doesn't even know about anything slightly remotely technical. Also, I feel the need to point out, the man shows no emotion ever. My mom and him are a strange couple. Way more than that to get into, but the most unsettling and sickening thing I found was panties. One small thing and a pair of size 14 underwear that looked like they might have belonged to my ex's daughter from years ago who stayed the night there on more than one occasion. There's also a pair of shorts I'm pretty sure were hers, but I would need to contact my ex to confirm that, but I'm almost positive. They don't get a lot of company, mostly just holidays. He needs to be exposed, and I'm sure of it. I'm just trying to figure out how to go about it. Now, I feel the need to point out here, OP, the collections of old magazines and adult content, whatever, I think that's weird, but like, fine. You don't need to call out your dad for something like that. I would say when bringing this up to someone, don't even bring that part up. I feel like it minimizes it. The whole having intimate articles of clothing from someone's daughter, I feel like that's worse. I feel like we can just focus on that. That seems like the bad part. This is a somewhat old post, so I hope this got dealt with. I have no clue. Anyway, that's the last story for today. I would like to thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.